Hey y'all, this week I've been working on the Peppermint shorts, Peppermint paper bag shorts I think they're called, from Pattern Runway. This is a free PDF printed pattern, and all the directions are super explanatory, and I found this pattern pretty easy to understand. So what's really awesome is that they give a glossary with words that you should know for this pattern, and the definition, which I love. As an educator, that's super helpful. Something to note that I found a little confusing was it states in advance that the seam allowance will be 5/8 of an inch, which is normal in patterns and sewing seams. I've noticed 5/8 is pretty normal, which is also why on my sewing machine I have labeled right here with a piece of tape to help me remember that. So they mentioned this here, but then I noticed, like, as I go through it, it almost always says 1 centimeter instead of 1.5 centimeters. So on my machine, this is 5/8 and down here is 3/8, which I'm assuming is the closest to 1 centimeter. So that's the seam allowance that I've been working with in this print, 3/8. Also, something to note about this pattern is the sizes run big, and I found that out first by helpful people on Instagram who told me that they had to size down 1 or 2. So for me, these are my measurements roughly. Like, I don't exactly fit this for a size 16. So I started out and I made a toil in a size 16 and it was way too big. So then I sized down to 12 and that fit a lot better. But because I'm only 5 foot, maybe 5.5 foot, I'm pretty short. The length of, I guess it would be either the crotch or the length of the waistline was way too long for me. So what I'm trying now, after 2 toils later, lots of trial and error, is I shortened the torso, and I also shortened the length of the shorts because my legs are just really short. So I'm hoping that after doing all those toils, it will work out with these actual shorts that I'm going to be making with you. So I'm going to skip over here now to the first steps that I'm going to be showing you. You're sewing the front pocket. So you're going to get out your 2 pieces of front shorts. So mine look like this. It's just like a chambray. How do you say that word? Anyway, okay, that's my front. This is my front right here as well. And I'm leaving my back pieces somewhere else so I don't get confused. So it says that you're gonna pin both of these front pockets to the shorts. So I have them right sides facing. So this is my right side. Wrong sides are gonna be on the outside. So I lined up the pockets, and one tip that I've learned from sewing is that when you're cutting out your fabric, don't forget to clip the little notches. So you'll see in the pattern, it has these lines, and it doesn't really tell you that those lines are for you to know certain things. So this lets me know, oh, this is where I'm gonna be folding it later on. Or over here, there's a little notch, and it lets me know that that's where I'm gonna be sewing to. So don't forget to clip those little notches like I did before you start sewing your pattern. So here are my front shorts, front pocket, sides facing, right sides facing, and I'm gonna sew from the waistline all the way to the, there's like a little point right here. And once I do that, then I'm gonna open it up. So when I open it up, these are both the right sides. I'm gonna iron this out, and then I'm gonna, I'm just gonna understitch the seam. So I think even, oh my gosh, these directions are so good, because I think even in the beginning, it gives you the definition for understitch. It sure does. That's why I love these directions, because you can go back. So I'm gonna do that right now, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, here are my shorts, my pocket. This is what the seam should look like. This was my first seam, and then I understitched it. So this is what it looks, nice and clean on the right side. Next step, now you're gonna be folding the pocket and adding a seam, trimming down the seam, turning it inside out, and then adding a seam on top. So the reason why I have these underlined is because I want it to notice that 6 millimeters is different from 1 centimeter, which is what they were working with when we were doing the seams here. And even over here in these steps, it goes back to 1 centimeter or 1.5. So right here, 6 millimeters and 3 millimeters, I have no idea, but what I'm gonna do on my sewing machine is I'm gonna sew my seam at 1/2 inch, and then I'll turn it inside out and add another seam. I don't know, maybe like 3/8 or 2/8, just because I don't feel like figuring out the math, and I know that it's okay because it's just a pocket. So here's the way I folded it. As you can see in their picture, they have shaded, and shaded means that it is the right side of the pocket. So right now, the right side of my pocket is facing out, and everything else is on the inside is wrong side. So this is the wrong side of my short. This is my pocket. I folded it right here on the notches. And now I'm gonna sew the seam. I'm gonna trim the leftovers. I learned that word in my last sewing tutorial, which is grading. You're gonna grade it and then turn it inside out. I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, I just finished the seam, and I took a pair of scissors and I trimmed just a little bit of the excess. So that word is called grading. I learned that in my last dress that I made too. And then you're gonna turn the pocket inside out, or in their vocabulary, they say right side facing, which is to me inside out basically. And then after you've fixed all the little puckers at the bottom, I didn't do that because I'm trying to use one hand, and I know this is very confusing, but my pocket is inside out now. So what I'm gonna do after I push all of this excess fabric out, I'm gonna iron it down and then add a seam right on top. So that seam is gonna close this excess fabric that was there. I'll show you what that looks like. Now it's saying to press and baste the side seams. So they're showing a basting right here on the top of the pocket, on the waist, and on the side of the pocket. So remember, if you saw my last video, baste is using a really loose stitching and making sure not to backstitch, so you're not locking that closed. And on mine, basting stitch would be this one because this is the widest stitch. This is where I'm normally stitching. So I have it ready on this one. And so in the picture you could see it's the right side. This is what the right side looks like, and that little line is what the pocket looks like. So this is what the wrong side looks like. This is my pocket. I probably should iron that. And if I flip it around on the opposite side, actually I kind of want to pin that down so it doesn't fly apart, but when I flip it on the opposite side, I'm sorry you all, I really got to get a tripod and do this the right way. But once I flip it on the opposite side, I'm going to line up all of this on the top. And here's where eventually you're going to put your hand in for the pocket. So you're going to baste that, and get ready, because next we're going to add this front pant to the back short. Front short, back short. Woo! The pocket is complete. It is ready to be added to the back short. So this is front side, right side facing. I'm going to get my back short. Right side is also facing. So I should see an entire inside out pair of shorts, okay? I arranged it over here on my other leg so you can see what it looks like. I lined up the seams on the edge and I pinned it because next I'm going to be sewing along the edge of the seam. And I also lined up this edging. So you'll see that in this picture right here. You're going to use 1 centimeter seam. On mine, that's about 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to use that as a reference. I neatened all the edges already. And then I'm going to sew right along there. And sew right along there on both legs. And then we're on to working on the crotch. More than halfway done. All right. Here's my shorts, seamed and zigzag closed. Same thing along the side seam. Now, this is the exciting part because now they're really going to start to feel like shorts. We're going to work on sewing the crotch. So, first thing that we're going to do to prepare is one short is going to be inside out, so the wrong sides are facing. I'm sorry, the right sides are facing. Look, this is facing the right side. And then the other short pair is going to be right side out, so wrong sides are facing. And then we're going to get ready to start attaching our crotches next. My crotch is all pinned up and ready to be sewed. Here I am on step 4, sewing the crotch. It says to stitch a seam of 1 centimeter, which for me, again, I'm using 3/8 of an inch. And then you stitch all the way around. And then right at the notches, you do a double stitch on top, just to secure that area, since that's the area that you're moving around most. So I will stitch 3/8 all the way around. And then my notches are marked right here. So I'm going to start here and sew right on top again up until right about there. That way it gives it some extra security around that area. And then I'll zigzag stitched it closed and show you what that looks like next. Here's what it looks like all finished the crotch. You could see I zigzagged it, I double stitched it right around this area where everything meets up at. Now I'm going to flip my shorts right side out, and I'm just fixing my pockets, making sure everything on the waistline is lined up, because now I'm going to start working on the waist. My basting stitch kind of came out a little bit. Yours, so right here, remember we did a little basting stitch right there. Mine kind of popped out, but that's okay. I'll just pin it right there. Okay, so these are what your shorts should look like. Now there's the front, there's the back. Then I'm going to take my waistband, and oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, I'm not going to do the paper bag version because I don't like all the puffiness that's on the top. So I'm referring to this stuff up here. That's too much for me. I have a really small torso because I'm short, and that just makes me look shorter. So what I'm doing instead of this paper bag top is I'm using a 2-inch elastic band on the inside of that, so it'll just fill that whole space. So my measurements for my waistband are exactly the same. I sewed 3/8 of a seam right here, and then ironed it open. And now I'm going to take this waistband, and this seam line is going to match the seam line in the back. So I'm going to flip it, because the front should look like this, the front of my waistband. So I'm going to wrap it around my shorts. Right sides are facing. So I have the shorts right side, and the waistband is inside out. So this is what it looks like on the back. Then I'm gonna pin and match all the seam lines along the top and get ready to sew right along the top of this. And this is gonna help me get my waistband ready. We'll see what that looks like next. Here's the waistband finished, just this top part, I'm sorry, the bottom part. This is what it looks like on the inside. So it says flip it out, so I flipped it out, and then I'm gonna iron this up so the seam on the inside is gonna be pointing up. I'm also gonna trim this seam to reduce the bulk. That's a suggestion that they make. Okay, so now I'm on this step, stitch in the ditch. It's slightly different for me because I didn't add the drawstring and I'm not doing the paper bag look. I'm just doing a full elastic. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this to the inside. And when I fold it all on the inside, actually before I do that, what I should do is fold that over, iron it, press it, because that's how I'm gonna close it up. So it'll close up like looking like this. So I'm gonna stitch all the way around with this folded, covering up that seam. You wanna cover up that seam that's exposed. And once you sew all the way around, don't forget to leave an opening, I don't know, about 5 inches or so, because that's where you're gonna shove the elastic through. All right, moving on to one of the last steps. As I'm stitching in the ditch, I'm also putting my right hand underneath and feeling just to make sure there's no puckers underneath, and also to make sure that where this is folded over, that it's actually right over where that stitch is at. If you're not paying attention to that and you're moving too fast, your needle might slightly move out or over, and then you're not actually gonna close up the seam. So just be mindful of that and go slow, try to enjoy the process. That's one thing that I'm learning as I'm sewing. I got my waistband sewed, closed. This is what it looks like on the inside. And I have an open spot right over here on the side. This is where I'm gonna slip the elastic through. Now, if you've never sewed elastic before, it doesn't really say anything here about how to find the right size for elastic. So my rule of thumb that I've learned from 100 Acts of Sewing when I made elastic pants is you measure your waist. So my waist is always between a 34 and a 36. So I'm just gonna say a 35, right? And you don't ever want to have 35 inches of elastic because the pants will just fall right off of you. So the rule of thumb, I think, from what I've learned, is you take away between 5 and 10 inches. So for me, if my waistline is around 35, my elastic could be between 30 and 25. So I took this elastic and I measured it at about 30, and then I kind of just fit it around my waist, and it felt slightly loose. So I actually cut mine down all the way down to a 25. So I took away 10 inches from what my waist is. Then with the elastic, I'm gonna attach a pin, and this pin is not the best. It's what I have right now, but I would find a really strong one. This one's not very strong. And then I'm gonna pin the edge of the elastic, close it, and that's how I'm gonna feed it all the way through. And when you're feeding it through, make sure the elastic stays straight all the way in and that it doesn't start to twist and turn. Otherwise you have to pull it out and redo it or shift it around and fix it. So I'm gonna slowly ease this through this hole right here and slide it around. And then I'm not gonna close and sew this yet. What I like to do is once I have it all the way inside of my waistline, I pin the band close giving myself, I don't know, about an inch. I pin this closed and then I try it on before I actually sew it closed, just to make sure that this elastic waistband actually fits the way I want to, before I close it and create even more work for myself. So I'm gonna do that, size it, make sure it fits okay, and if it fits okay, then I'll show you next how to sew up this elastic and close this up. And then the only step we have is the bottom hemline. Just tried it on, everything fits okay. I don't need to change the length of my elastic band. Before I start to sew this elastic band closed, I'm just gonna make sure that everything on the inside is lined correctly. Sometimes it twists a little bit or folds. I wanna make sure that before sewing it closed that everything is in the correct way. When I sew this closed, I usually give myself about an inch, and I'm gonna stitch it on my tightest stitch right here, or you could do zigzag, and then I'm just gonna run a bunch of lines all along here to make sure that elastic is closed really well. Then I'm gonna tuck it in this hole and sew that closed. Once that is sewed closed, I'm probably gonna add another stitch or two across the band, mainly because, well, it's nice as a decorative piece, but also for me, if I don't sew this elastic in with another stitch, it tends to like move around inside of there when I'm putting it on, and that really bothers me. So I'm gonna work on that next and close this up. Waistband is finished. Sewed just a little extra stitch at the top to hold the band in place. Now I'm at the step where I'm adding the hem. So what was not very clear, and maybe this is just something that if you were more of an advanced sewer you would know, but it doesn't state the seam allowance. And throughout the whole process, it's been telling me to do it at 1 centimeter. And so because it didn't say it here, I went back to the beginning where it says seam allowances are all 5/8 of an inch unless otherwise indicated. So in all of these other steps, it indicated actually that the seam allowance would be smaller at 3/8. So what I just did right now is I did it at 5/8 because it didn't specify. And when I did it at 5/8, I just pinned it on right now. And I don't know if you can see, but there's this huge amount of excess fabric on the shorts because this seam allowance is way too big. So I'm putting a note here to myself that the seam allowance needs to be 3/8, which is about 1 centimeter. So although it doesn't say it right here, I'm gonna add it just so I remember. So now what I have to do is undo this seam and sew it again at 3/8. So I don't know, it'll be like right about there instead. And once I pin it back on, that should be perfect for all of this excess fabric on the short. So it's trial and error. Like I said, if you're a beginner like me, I'm the type of person to read every single detail to make sure I'm doing it the right way. And when there's not detail, then I just refer to what was referenced in the beginning of the directions. So that was a little frustrating, that it doesn't specify the seam allowance, but that's okay. It's not a huge, it's not a lot of work to redo this. So I'm glad that I didn't do it on both shorts, because then I would have had to do it again twice. So I'm gonna redo that and see if it fits the second time. So when I changed this to 3/8 instead of 5/8, it fit perfectly. So this is what my finished side looks like. I got a little lazy and I just zigzag stitched it, and then on the opposite side, this is what my hemline looks like and my seam. If you're not feeling lazy, you can tuck that under and give it a nice clean finish, just like I did up here on the waistband. So I wasn't lazy there. I'm getting lazy towards the end. I just want to finish. I know I'm a really bad example. Okay, now I'm gonna do this and I'm finished. I'll show you what it looks like on a hanger, and I'm also gonna try it on just to show y'all what the fit looks like. All right, here they are in their full glory. Let's see. Nice elastic band, pockets. Here's the seam line for the shorts. The inside looks great. Now let's try them on and see what they look like. I think for me they're a tiny bit short, and that's my own fault because I actually shortened them by an inch. So I think the next pair that I make, I'll just shorten them by ½ an inch, and they'll be perfect. Yes, I could dance in them. The waist fits perfect. The sides are a little short, but that's okay. I can fix that next time. I can tuck in a shirt like so, or I could just wear long shorts over them. They're pretty cozy. I love them.